Welcome to Systemic Societal Health, the podcast that explores how the science of energy networks creates a logical, practical, rigorous, and heartwarming understanding of what goes into building healthy, durably vibrant human networks. I'm your host, Dr. Sally Gerner, Research Director for Edinburgh University's Planetary Health Lab. Well, today we're going to be talking with Eric Derks about his work using systems thinking to develop practical approaches to creating lasting systemic socio-economic change. And Eric is the managing partner in the Canopy Lab, a US-based small business of international development practitioners, project managers, researchers, strategic advisors, trainers, and theorists dedicated to developing systemic approaches to complex social challenges in local and international development. With 30 years of experience in international development, Eric has designed and led large-scale projects, molded high-performance teams, I like that sounds, and applied systems thinking to project strategy, activities, operations, and knowledge management with organizations, communities, and government entities across the globe. So welcome to the podcast, Eric. How are you?
Hi, Sally. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, I mean, we've been talking on and off about this kind of stuff for years now. And what attracts me most to your kind of work is that you integrate, well, first of all, you're looking towards long-term systemic change, not just a one-off project and that's difficult because a lot of international development is focused on let's do a water project here or let's do an education project there, but keeping those things and really organizing them into a self-sustaining system is a whole nother deal.
Is this where I'm supposed to
yes,
chime in
here.
That was the leading question, the leading conversation starter.
That's it.
That was it. All right, great. Yeah. Hey, yeah, I agree. It is difficult. Yeah. In international development, as we've talked, the appetite is for 3 5-year types of projects, certain amounts of funding, focus on development outcomes. So there's a consciousness about spending resources, money, and getting a return, and that return being reduction in poverty, increases in incomes, lower child mortality rates, certain behavior changes, certain impacts or ways in which the system works that look better, more trade, more exports, stronger agricultural processing, but more value addition going on. So a lot of types of outcomes looking for and get shaped into a particular investment of development and systems thinking helps us overall make so much more better sense of what's going on, why things work the way they do, as one intervenes and learns about the system. So, and recognizing that for lasting types of changes, we need to be getting at some of the root causes, which are variably systemic in nature, around the things we've talked about, how people interrelate, the types of connections taking place in the market. Go back to the systems iceberg and all the things that are below the waterline that are weighty dynamics shaping patterns of behavior. That's nothing new. That's been around for longer than me, and I feel like I think we in the development sphere, international, I could speak more about market systems development because we think along those terms a lot. Started embracing a lot of these ideas and these understandings more to influence how we understand the systems to intervene in and the types of interventions that can shift patterns of behavior can shift how the system itself functions and performs to perform in ways that are more equitable, inclusive, competitive, and the like.
Okay, so can you say a little bit more about what you mean by systems thinking and systems
Well, that's
approaches?
I don't
Yes.
know how many times I've gotten into trouble with that. You talk to different people, and systems thinking means something different to them,
Yeah.
and I I real and every single time I realize what a charlatan I am in terms of uh, use of the term and not being as ideologically wed to something that I don't understand.
Right.
And so uh, for me, systems thinking is having a systems perspective, which is recognizing or well, looking at the patterns of behavior, actions that when we might see, and being able to craft an explanation for why that is based upon the underlying dynamics within a system. The cultural biases, the institutional dynamics, the relationships, the structures, the rules, the regulations, all those things which have a huge causal connection to patterns of human behavior, whether it be in economic systems or whatever, what have you. Um, and it's it's almost very hubristic to say to have that perspective, but it's more aspirational because it's fairly elusive, and it seems like so it's not that um, uh, we in our work we can say with a great deal of confidence we understand what's going on. We have certain hypotheses of why things behave the way they do, which can point us to uh, areas of intervention. Of throwing resources to see if we can effectuate change, which so as along the time that more of this type of systems thinking became shared, understood, and incorporated into uh, intervention design and assessment, also emerged um, greater appreciation for adaptive management and experimentation and iteration and prototyping, things that we recognize that, well, there's such a great deal of uncertainty in terms of our presumption about why things work the way they do, that if we think we can intervene here, we better be really careful about doing so, because it may not be the case and it may have unintended consequences. And so we need to start small and and iterate, adjust, and be ready to pivot as necessary.
Okay, so I'm going to lay on you my particular vision of this whole systems theory kind of thing,
Great.
which is that half of me is an engineer, the other half of me is a psychologist. And the psychologist looks at the world and says there is a common root cause, and it's culture. It's cultural, and I'm calling it oligarchic capitalism, but it's basically it's hierarchies run by and for the benefit of a few guys on top.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and what I see, so I'm saying that we're in the midst of going through a Copernican flip. It's the same facts that you already know, but they're going to be organized in a completely different way. And in particular, the main thing that comes out of it is looking at human beings instead of seeing us as a sort of like this complete accident in the universe, and B as these selfish economic beasts who that evolution runs on selfish genes, and it's everything's fixed in our behavior, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We see ourselves as a collaborative learning species, which is in fact designed to adapt. And so that's our big thing, is that's why we talk, that's why we build scientific theories, and that's why but our cultures are designed to kind of keep collaborative learning on an even keel, so you don't go just willy-nilly off of every new thing. So we have a diffusion of innovation where you start with innovators and you'd have early adopters, but the key is these early majority people because they don't want to, they're the gatekeepers to the mainstream and they don't want to swallow a poison pill. So you have to have solid evidence that what you're doing is something that's going to be useful and beneficial and move the whole system forward. Okay, so I see a lot of what you're trying to do is establish this idea of regularly re-examining what you're doing and having these iterative planning and revising and doing that as an integral part of your plan, actually, so that you don't get too far down the road and suddenly find out, well, gee, I should have done something else, but that was 3 years ago or something like that.
Right.
But the other part of it is that I sort of see us as what we're trying to do now is learn the real rules of organizational health. And organizational health has these two main parts. One is the circulation part. So you have to get resources and money and information and energy all flowing from top to bottom, and so that you nourish all parts of the whole and keep them coordinated and connected. And you also have to maintain reliable inputs and healthy outputs so you basically don't kill yourself off. Then there's the structural parts where you have to have these fractal hierarchies where you have a balance of small, medium, and large, and balance of resilience and efficiency, and also balance of extraction versus constructive activity, things like that. So I see us as a collaborative learning species that's just beginning to learn the real rules of systemic health. And I see what you're trying to do in modifying the culture as heading towards that. So when you talk about, you told me a story once about someplace you were working and you were trying to get different tribal groups, and some tribal groups were, the dominant ones would have a lot of cronyism and nepotism and kind of various corruption. And in order to get past that, you were establishing common standards in the network, in the value chain, as it were, that they were all connected to. And you were supporting the people who were in the local network, who were adhering to those standards and advertising that it's more reliable to buy things that meet the standards and so on and so forth. But it was kind of a concrete, very practical way of doing these things, as opposed to trying to just say you shouldn't be doing cronyism anymore or nepotism. So do you remember any of these kinds of things, or?
No, that's really, I mean, it's I would say it's a very common tactic among our strategy in market development, market systems development, where for all the things that you just mentioned, for flows of resources, information, people have trusting relationships, recognizing that there is value in those dynamics for overall system health, that impediments to those, one of the common impediments is just lack of transparency. And because these asymmetries of information can be taken advantage of,
right,
by other sides. And so there's not only poor information flowing through, there's also misapprehension about who to trust as trading partners and the like, and you have more isolation of people, less agency on people who do not have information, more agency on those who do have information. And as we know, it is not those who have tend toward having more, and those who have less tend toward having less.
Yeah.
And so it's, sure, righting those imbalances, but it's not there is a social justice aspect in all of those things. But the pragmatic, I don't say levers to pull, but some of the pragmatic things to be looking at are ways of creating transparency and information. You see it. I'm working with a project now that's doing a lot in terms of improving the business environment in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is been very much a difficult place to work. But a lot of what they're working on is just throwing lots of resources into boosting the digitalization of public information, how businesses get registered, collateral registry and electronic collateral registry. There is a collateral registry, but it's all on paper. That nobody has confidence that the things that get registered are going to be around in 10 years and still consultable. But when it's digitized, now you can have banks registering collaterals right away. They can be consultable over the life of the loan. And what this does is it creates a lot more confidence. Well, people in the banking sector, a lot more confidence that the client they're coming with, who's coming to them looking for a loan and using their property or asset as collateral, doesn't already have it used as collateral in other banks, which tends to be the case. So, so you can imagine the risk aversion and why interest rates might be fairly high. In this partially because of that. So they're looking at just throwing, and they're not alone, and there's other organizations doing this as well. But it has a huge potential impact on just creating confidence, better flows of information, levels of honesty that the system can be working, and it's not just who you know, but
what's available to be known. Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, and see, it's the pragmatism that I like. I think the goal is social equity and just sort of general fairness and mutual benefit in all of these kinds of systems.
Right.
But I just think accusing people of the truth, which is what you're doing is corrupt, unequal, unfair, whatever you want to call it, only goes so far unless you have these kind of practical kinds of alternatives that help you get around. So that, however, works mainly with banks, right? So it's the banks that are going to benefit from these registries.
Most immediately, yes. But you could start tying those banks, that registry to the central bank that can now start looking at the collateral registry, can start looking at the property deeds registry, can start looking at the business registration registry and the annual accounts. All these things being digitized can now begin to start making more sane projections about what's happening with the economy and recognizing, seeing uptick in banks, seeing uptick in businesses being registered, what is happening, where is investment happening, where is it not happening. I think it start being right now the central bank in the DRC, the economy is in many respects a black box, but you just don't know what's happening with it. But with better digitization in these regards, of all those different types of things, this is the types of things that can emerge from that. And unsurprisingly, perhaps one of the slowest to come on board. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, and it's not just one organization, and it's not just going to happen over a short period of time. But one of the laggards, you're talking about your diffusion of innovation curve and your early adopters. Right. One of the laggards to kind of all of this and protecting their turf is the tax people, because they've been getting away with lots up to date, and they really don't want to be participating. They don't want to be sharing their database with anybody else because hey, this is their source of revenue. But you can imagine at some point there's going to become huge pressure for them to be part of the system too, and so that there's a much more even playing field for businesses to move into. Or is this going to become the weakest link in the chain, and there's going to be pressure? So it's a process that in itself creates a huge amounts of social pressure moving forward. I mean, that's what happens with rules, right? Rules become kind of constraints on people's behavior, and the more people behave in these ways, the more they want other people to behave in these ways, and that's what. So the rules of the game proverbially have changed, and this is what people this is how change happens. This is where that gets amplified over time.
So is this a kind of an optimistic view of the diffusion of innovation again, where it really does kind of move along? It doesn't just get stuck at the top when you get to the guys who have a vested interest in the status quo, the laggards, or
Oh no, not really. I don't actually. My pessimism is pretty profound in many regards in terms of change, just because I think it's easy to underestimate. Well, it's easy to underestimate that which you can't see, and we don't see so much of all the other forces that keep systems from evolving in a different trajectory,
in a graceful way. Yeah.
Escaping the path dependency that has brought you to where you are, and all the forces that come with that. I mean, there are huge institutional barriers, formal and informal, that can one begin to perhaps point to and talk about why things perform this way, and they just they're creating new paths for them to evolve down. Also creates there has to be ease for that to go, pressures to roll down or up that slope, or whatever, however you want to look at it. So it's very problematic.
Right.
And in we started this conversation briefly off with the 3-5 year window of a lot of projects. Well, unfortunately, in creating and gestating and pushing along transformative types of changes, it's more than just obviously a 3-5 year effort. And so then that which I think kind of adds to a little bit of my pessimism about the potential for such funding mechanism to sustain, to sustain, to foster the momentum, to foster the movement, and help it flourish and emerge, help it emerge, so that there's really true emergence outside of the resources provided externally by donors, that these new patterns don't wither away and die, but they become the predominant ones.
Right. Yes, I mean, it's the catch-22, which is a lot of the funders are themselves, even though they're trying to do something good with their money. Was it? There's this guy Anand Garahadas. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but he has the book called "Winner Take All," and it's about pretty much the philanthropy is, they spend all of this money to do really good things, but then on the other hand, they don't want to do anything that threatens their actual ability to make a huge amount of money. It's like, and a lot of this stuff I don't think it would eliminate the amount of having wealthy people. I think what it would do is limit how much wealthier they could become beyond other people. So it's limiting the extractive potential in some sort of sense. Because, okay, so another cute little book was called "Only the Super Rich Can Save Us." It was by Ralph Nader some years ago. But his thing was to get together people, and he had a list of 10 or 15 of them, the Warren Buffetts, and I think he had Paul Newman, and I can't remember all the different people he had on it. But the people who were willing to actually make changes that would impact their own bottom line, but would fund it to create these longer term things. And part of me thinks that there needs to be some kind of outreach to some set of those kinds of super rich people, because I don't believe all super rich people are so obsessed with the power part. I mean, obviously there are many of them that are, that they are willing to let the planet and civilization go under, which is what we're facing now. So I don't know, but you're pessimistic. I keep thinking that
it's pessimistic. Yes, I mean, pessimistic. It's tough. Some days pessimistic, some days optimistic. I wonder if it's just whether I've drunk enough water that day. But I mean, I think that there are aspects and room for optimism. My partner in Canopy Lab, and whenever days I get pessimistic about certain things, and he like, no, look, we as humans, we're going to get through this. We're going to get into space. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing that. We shall overcome. There may not be, as many of us as there are right now in the future, but boy, we can
Yeah.
we can prevail. We will prevail. That's his thing. So I take solace in a lot of that for him.
Well, then for me, a lot of it is how do you get us to become a really effective collaborative learning species? And a lot of that has to do with some of the practical things. And how do we get common cause culture running around as opposed to this self-interest, selfishness kind of, I'm a lone individual and all that matters is what I can get out of it kind of thing.
I was discussing some science fiction books with my son, and we have a shared interest in those things. And he confirmed for me that this was actually kind of something that he'd read about elsewhere. The idea that in this book I was reading, there's this intergalactic body that just whose members have to pass a certain threshold. They have to get out of their own solar system, because to get out of their own solar system, you will have to have cooperated enough and collaborate. You'll have to have developed a collaborative enough culture to get out, and therefore we don't want to even talk with you until you as a species, till you get out of your solar system, because then you've passed the test. Then you can become you can now become a member in our group. And I find that delightful.
One of the other ones that I've heard, and this is actually, I think, originally real physics, is the theory of civilization as monitored by how you use energy, which is the first stage of civilization is where you actually manage the use of energy on your system so you don't destroy yourselves. We're not there yet, but we're
not there yet. No. Not alone. But the collaboration part, I was telling you earlier, I think in another conversation or an email before this podcast, about some other thing I had been looking into and being exposed to and was really kind of excited by, because it's really centered on the building capacity to collaborate, to change systems. So all the things that we talked about early on, and it's like, hey, we can make sense of why things work the way they do, perhaps at different scales, down to an organization, a supply chain, a city, and looking at an economy, for an agricultural economy, for example, which tends to be a lot of what we're looking at. A lot of that very high level. Okay, this is the general pattern of way things happen. We can talk about certain rules and policies that are going on, flows of resources, the way people interact, cultural norms and whatnot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But where's the practical tactics to really be able to create this types of change, or where does this change come from? And it comes from what you're talking about, as you know, people being able to solve wicked problems, complex problems, manage complexity. What would this area look like if it were much more attractive and vibrant? What needs to happen, and how can groups of people come together and tackle those issues in ways that aren't, let's pull together a large roadmap. That would treat the problem as like David Snowden would call it a complicated problem, which you can, so you get an expert to help you solve, because we know how to solve that problem. All we just need is somebody who's well informed and seen it enough time to assess it and go with it. But it's a complex problem. It's not. There's more than one solution. It's unclear what the outcomes are going to be to all the things we do. But we're so bad at strategizing for such problems. We don't necessarily have the skills and capacities to do so. We do, but we don't necessarily call it these things, and or can consistently keep those things going. But so how do we prototype and iterate as in a group, whether it's a group within an organization or a group within a community, toward a general outcome of, well, this would be a much better place if, and let's kind of think what that is, and let's start a process of of putting resources towards some of these things in incremental ways that help us learn along the way, uh, pull in other people to the same process, and sets up a dynamism of more collaborative activity and mutual reliance of our uses of resources to achieve particular ends. And this group out of Purdue, calling it strategic doing, they talk about having numbers of years of experience in just how to facilitate this process and build the skills of small groups to group big groups, start slow so that they can iterate faster and better, but just how to manage, how to collaborate effectively to achieve change in a complex situation.
Right, and I assume that it has, you start with the small guys, but then you have to have representatives from the small guys into medium-sized groups, and I mean, is it scalable, as they say?
Yeah, I mean, everything is, well, not everything, but yes, the idea is through small groups and action in then pulling in other people out of from these people's networks and increasing that network of people who can buy in, like what this is about, see where it's going, want to contribute, want to participate, and move things forward.
And do they have, I mean, one of the things that always fascinates me is the fact that we all play different roles in this whole knowledge ecology things, Um, some people are very organizational oriented and great at building teamwork, and other people are, I'm a theorist and an idea person, but, you don't try to get me to do, uh, you know, teamwork building or team building or stuff like that. Detail people and big picture people and technical and social and all the different kinds of things. And I really think some of it is you have to have a system designed to work where you have a quorum of all of the types that you need in order to get it to go.
Mm.
Um, and I also think that there's something about human relationships and it being personal and designed to incentivize what's good for the whole, not just the individual. Because right now, there was a great article called The Synergy Gamut by Ruth Benedict, who was a colleague of Margaret Mead's. Anyway, she studied a bunch of different societies and found that the ones that were working, where, it's kind of like this utopian thing where there was virtually no homicide or suicide, or, there was, virtually no hostilities going on, individual hostilities going on inside the society. It was, they were designed such that there was a phrase, something like, every act was designed to, was incentivized to serve, the things that served the whole as well as the individual, so that it was never one or the other in conflict. Whereas and the ones that were like us, where there's, there's tension all over the place, and there's murder, and there's the misery index is incredibly high, and there's gross inequities, and nobody is ever safe, right? So that even if you're incredibly wealthy, somebody bigger and badder than you could come along and take it away from you if they so choose, or if the tea leaves fall the wrong way, kind of thing. But those are the places where everything was structured so that each individual was solely out for themselves. And apparently these are real societies that fall on this synergy gamut. So I was always wondering, and because you look at the way we solved incentives for self-interest and competition everywhere, and then and economics is all, and evolution, for heaven's sakes, is all structured as if everything is better when you have head-to-head competition over, and particularly over price and winner take all.
Only in one half of the prisoner's dilemma. I mean, the other half, the prisoner's dilemma, would argue otherwise.
It's true,
but it does take a more of a leap of faith, right?
Yeah. Well, it takes consciously structuring these incentives. So have you ever heard of this group called Mondragon in the Basque part of Spain?
Yeah, you've told me about them.
Okay, but you don't have any.
No, but apart from that, no.
See, I think a lot of this has to do with management and how management structures incentives, because
Mm.
you do have to have somebody who's managing all of this, because it doesn't happen all by itself, and it can't just happen at the grassroots level. But they have things like they have one was called a social committee, and the social committee's job was not just to throw parties, but to actually examine what people needed, what were their needs that weren't being met. And as a result of examining some of these things, they've set up their own university system, they've set up their own banking system. And so they keep pressures from building to extraordinary types, extremes, and it allows them to change more rapidly and gracefully, I guess, hopefully. But of course,
You think that when you talk about management structures, setting the incentives, is there any connection by chance to being able to manage through and around an adaptive cycle of things, through upturns, downturns, recognizing where you are on the peak of the upturn, and that, hey, we need to either make a lateral jump, shift, or hedge our bets, spread out, put resources in different baskets so it doesn't all crash into something.
I don't think they use that language, but there is definitely some of that. So they definitely are ready to shift workers around to different companies, or shift them away into take a course now, instead of, because your particular company is going through hard times. The refrigerator manufacturing is slow this month, or we're having an economic downturn. But those only work to a certain degree, especially when you're having a global crisis where everything is going down.
Right.
and of course, then they're facing with the bigger pressures from the broader groups, from the international community, and from people who don't like this whole idea because it seems too communist, I think, socialist, whatever you want to call it.
They can't. There's not a clear enough pyramid for them to climb on top of it, and it can't be co-opted as such.
Right. So they work assiduously to avoid politics in anything that they do. So in order to avoid being damaged by somebody from the outside who's not happy. So we haven't talked very much about you. So how do you also work with a bunch of people who are doing this systems thinking kind of approach?
Yeah, so we've got a small consultancy business. There's three managing partners. Myself, I started the business, and then in 2019, was joined by Tim Sparkman and a friend of mine for a while. We were both I've known him for a long time, but we were both in Uganda managing different projects there. And Holly Kruger, who I met through some various consulting. She was managing one of the projects in DRC at some point, but she's based in Morocco, working there. And my friend Tim is here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we've got probably a couple dozen different consultants we work with on a regular basis. We're just starting out. We're just getting starting out in that, having our first hire in our belts. I have some number of projects. We're growing. Growing organically, well, organically, what other way there is there to grow? Can't be doing it in other ways. Don't just say. I mean, we do. Let's see, kind of thinking of the areas that we're getting into, intervening in changing systems. Take that as however we would like. Organizational development. We work with a lot of projects and for-profit and not-for-profit organizations in how to apply some systems thinking to improve ways that they're operating. There are lots of codified approaches or very people very dogmatic about certain approaches to market systems development or applying systems thinking, and we try to be as agnostic as possible, recognizing that hey, we think we've through our experience in managing projects and doing this work for a while and exploration of the usefulness of a systems perspective and such, help people with what they're doing themselves, not say like, hey, you got to do it this way or you can't do it that way, but hey, here's some ways that can help you improve the way you are conceiving of intervening and intervening and creating change in ways of actually going about and measuring and looking for that change to see if you are pushing things in the right direction. Be aware of the unintended consequences, the unintended outcomes and the like. So we have that systems change, organizational development. We do a lot of product evaluation and work with projects on their own monitoring and evaluation in internal components, which also kind of dovetails with the organizational developmental aspects of becoming better learning organizations. How do you be much more intentional about what you think is going to happen so that you can actually tell whether things are moving in that direction? How can we shorten the feed, the information loops based from doing something to understanding or being able to have some opinion about whether it's actually moving things in the right direction or not, as opposed to just relying on sets of indicators that are lagging a bit far behind your actual activities and engagements with people. Are they having the intended response or not? What are signs of failure success that this overall strategy is having what you think it should be doing, or do you need to be looking elsewhere? I guess the last aspect of things we get into is a fair amount of research. Some of it kind of dovetails with helping people make sense of the product space they're working in. Some of it is looking at policy space in 7 West African countries related to cashews. What are the various regulatory regimes and policies, and how is this affecting price fluctuations and spikes and investments in cashews in these countries? And so that was a bit of interesting amount of research in there. I don't know. We get into a whole range of things. We very much like to our professional backgrounds all started in economic development, market development, market systems development, but we recognize thinking about practical application of systems thinking that it's not just into economic development or market systems development. We'd like to be much more involved in other spaces, recognizing that there's obvious applicability, even if there isn't a fundamental understanding of the subject matter in, say, healthcare, housing, workforce development, and the like, that the issues are very similar fundamentally. And so understanding some of the issues and underlying dynamics of systems is important, but then also being able to work with people and facilitate interaction, learning, elevation of perspective of what you're seeing, how you're able to learn, and pulling those things together in crafting ways of intervening that can be then more iterative and adaptive to the outcomes you're generating.
So it sounds like you're actually living your practice. That is, you go in, sort of adapt to what they're doing, and you have this toolkit of stuff inside that you know of that can maybe help, but it's very iterative and ongoing and adaptive and back and forth and changing as you go.
I think so. One of the I think it's a bit of a crime. I've been part of the process of training. In our industry, everybody in the industry has the training division of people who do lots of training and this and that, and I've been part of that in terms of training people in certain methodologies and approaches and tools, and those all I think they fail. They have a low percentage success rate because you can talk about new ways of doing things, but then people go back to their companies, their outfits, the projects they're working on, and there's still a host of procedural components, policies, management incentives and messaging, organizational structure, so many things that hey, maybe they don't even fit in that. And so somebody can start tinkering around the edges, or maybe they do take a bit of a foothold, but you start applying and working, but you don't have people around which to have useful, meaningful conversations about these. Or if you don't, then those things also languish. And so I think we've tailored our training and organizational development to embrace two important concepts. One is that introducing concepts and skills in formal types of sessions is important. Following that up with practical application is equally as important. And so there has to be that type of coaching and hands-on involvement and successive coaching to helping people build up their own mastery of these areas of expertise. That's one. The second one is not to, I don't want to be condescending and say not to raise the bar too high, but people have their frames of reference.
Right.
You can't provide a university course to people who are making a transition from doing humanitarian relief and are moving into economic development. Well, you have to help them present the frame of systems thinking that embraces both of those and help them see the horizon a little further over the horizon. That's because then people are much able to take those steps and move into those spaces than they would otherwise.
It's overwhelming, though, that the amount of knowledge you have to have. I mean, just that last example where you have to have a framework that embraces these two smaller frameworks in order to help somebody manage to make the transition between the two. Wow. I mean, that's.
Yeah, it's. I mean, a lot of it is just having managed similar projects and oriented teams and build capacity. You get a sense of where people's heads are,
Mm-hmm.
what they're embracing, what are they looking at, what's important to them, what's driving them, or what are they seeing, and what's influencing their decisions. What are their mental models? If I was smarter, I'd probably hire people with a better ability to categorize and characterize people's mental models and be able to use that. And I think there are things for that, but it would have to tailor to perhaps things that fit with systems thinking and the like. But I don't know.
And how do people who want to hire you find you? I mean, is there a particular? You're not advertising one particular thing, right? It's systems theory, but thinking, but it's very, like you say, agnostic. Covers them.
Well, that is a challenge. I mean, we kind of we chuckle about the fact that all our services are rather bespoke, and it's true. But it's the practical application of systems thinking and how to help you and your teams work more effectively. I mean, and that, right, people who kind of gravitate to our website and who are part of our networks tend to be part of the international economic development field, and so that keeps us awful busy. We are actively also, I guess, looking under rocks and networking with people in other spaces. My partner Tim is talking to a whole bunch of people here in the U.S. about workforce development. I mean, he worked on a lot of workforce development issues in different places in other parts of the world, and he's very curious about it here, but also with the eye to, hey, maybe I don't have to get on a plane that is eight hours. You can just get on one that's maybe for 2 hours or less, and have a satisfying satisfied client at the end of the day as well.
Well, I'm going to have to close this off because we're only supposed to try to keep these to 40 minutes, but this has been fun.
It is, and I'm sure that the person editing this will have to bring it all down to
whatever we need.
whatever you need, and I hope there's enough in here. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks a bunch.
My partner and I, Tim, tried to do a podcast a while ago, but then we were editing. It's like, we didn't have the guy that hopefully is going to do a good job for this, but we recognize, one, it's so big, and two, we just wanted to keep having these conversations going. We were just having so much fun, and it's like, well, where do we begin to edit it? Nobody would want to listen to the whole thing, or maybe they do. I don't know.
All right. Well, take care. I'm going to stop the recording now.